was going on. We had huge demand from the residents and visitors especially down at the beach, where obviously we had some restrictions that had never been there before. Plus, we, I think, started earlier than normal. And, from what I could see in my 2 or 3 visits down there over the weekend, things were going pretty smoothly, given what could have been a very tough weekend. So I want to just tell everybody thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right. You want to start with taking the roll call?
Sure. I'm just going to use my screen to do that. Commissioner Clark.
Here.
Commissioner Wolf.
Here.
Commissioner Abbott.
Here.
Commissioner Schisler.
Here.
Commissioner Murdoch.
Here.
Found him. Vice President Goebel.
Here.
And President Anderson.
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right. Well, we got a lot of correspondence. By my count, there were 137 pages of it, dozens and dozens of emails, almost exclusively centered around the pools, the beach, and Gilson Park, with the overwhelming majority of them really requesting that we open up as much as possible within the appropriate constraints. There was not much opinion outside of that, and it was probably the biggest response to a single topic that I've seen in my 5 years so far on the board. So there was a lot there, a lot to go through. And buried in the correspondence was one item that Amy had forwarded from Go Green that related to the gas-powered leaf blowers. It's Beth Drucker sent it originally. And, in sort of parsing through it, the thing I saw in there was sort of a request that we look at increasing the use of electric over gas-powered as we look at the Park District, because we're currently exempt from the regulations that are in place through May through September. But that there was a deluge of correspondence this month.
I see Commissioner Wolf has her hand up.
Can I go? I just had a question. A lot of the emails were centered around having the beachfront be open for residents only. We all on the board know why that's not possible, but is there a way to communicate that with the public? Because I get asked about that all the time, and I don't know if there's a way to let people in the community know why we can't open it to just residents.
Sure. We could definitely include that in a future correspondence to the entire community, explaining that the laws of the state of Illinois would prohibit that, outright prohibits it, and then we're not going to violate the laws of Illinois. I've been responding more and more to emails with that information, and most people go, oh, didn't know, thank you.
Exactly. I think once people understand, they're totally fine with it. It's just a perception that we can control that and we can't. So,
Commissioner Clark and then Commissioner Abbott.
Yeah, I was going to pretty much say what Commissioner Wolf was saying, and whether your next communication could highlight the fact that there have been many requests that we cannot do that by state law. So that I was going to really make the same comment that Commissioner Wolf just said.
Sounds good. Commissioner Abbott?
Yes. I always find that the historical, the origins of both the Park District and Gilson, because of course they're linked, and the land being a free gift from Cook County is also a powerful argument. I always like to include that. The other thing that we do have an elaborate fee structure down there at the lakefront, which favors, and parking structure as well as a fee structure that favors residents a great deal. And this has been worked out over the years. Plus, so it's kind of, we do favor residents a great deal. So anyway, those are points I wish to make. I do want to say that it's not just up to staff, I think, to make our arguments. We are accountable to the public, and I think it's good for the board to I mean, I know we do so publicly, and I know we never miss an opportunity to do so, but I want to make sure that, we're right there. The board is, this is the board, it's coming from the board as well. That's all.
Thank you.
It wasn't very eloquent, sorry.
I was going to say something similar to Brian, but I would just make the point that the resident, non-resident season pass thing should be part of the response that we were talking about earlier about not being able to close the park to non-residents. That way people can connect the two. We're restricting access. We're doing it in a way that's different than what they would think would be the way, but it's equally as effective probably. So, it sort of answers the question they're getting at without doing it the way they want it done.
Okay. Back to you, President Anderson. I think we're on communications and correspondence.
Yeah, Steve, one of the things that, we had talked about and with a deluge of emails like this, it's not really practical for us to respond to each one individually. But we want to make sure that each one is responded to. And if you could kind of update the board with sort of how we're making sure that at least one person is responding to each email.
Sure. Commissioner Anderson and I spoke last Friday about many topics, and this was one of them, is how do we properly respond to public emails, make sure they're being responded to, and, depending on who the president is and what the topic, it's slightly been handled differently as people change. And what we agreed to was that I would respond, acknowledge every email, let them know that we are going to include it as a part of the board packet, include it as a part of the board packet, and give the official response from me as the executive director of the Park District. That isn't to say that our intent is to prevent any individual commissioners from replying to any particular email they see fit. It's more to let you know that the people will be getting responses. And that you're not obligated to, they don't necessarily need 8 responses to every email. I actually would recommend we don't have 8 responses to every email, because we probably at times will have slightly different wording, which will come off as contradictions of one another. But we're also not here to tell you as an elected official when and how to communicate with someone in your electorate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else on communications and correspondence?
The only thing, I would like to jump in and comment on the Go Green email and just give the board a little bit of a background as to that topic. Yes, we were exempt from that ordinance when the Village of Wilmette instituted it. We still are to this day. The reason why we have not gone more gas to date, or more electric to date, is that the capability of the electric equipment, and more specifically the batteries, with the amount of work we're doing across the amount of property we're maintaining versus someone's residential home, we're burning through the batteries so quickly that it used to really hamstring our ability. With that being said, over the last 3 years, the technology has been advancing quite quickly in that realm, and we have been hosting, along with members of Go Green, some of these manufacturers who create these electric tools. We've been hosting workshops at our maintenance facility for our staff to learn, but also invite other districts to come learn as well. So we were on track to try and put in one kind of crew that was going to be responsible for certain parks with an all-electric set of equipment this year. And then the world went the way the world went, and we haven't done that yet. So we're right there on the cusp of really starting to put it into a real life test scenario, see what the results are, and see how we progress going forward.
Sounds good. Okay. Anybody else have any correspondence that didn't make it in the packet or shared very recently?
There was one that I got the other day, and I forwarded it to Steve, but it was after I think the packet had been sent out. And I noticed this as well when I was down there the other day at the beach. Some of as the sand has shifted and moved, the fencing is kind of lower at some points, and people had access to be able to jump over the fence. And I'm sure that Steve can talk to this, but there's probably ways, and at one point we had talked about, I remember Andy Chinich was saying we could double the fence up so it'd make it less likely that somebody could jump over and things like that. But that was in one of the communications I received, that they were watching people jump over the fence. So I don't know if there's been any more discussion around that.
Yeah, we kind of have that as a part of our item 6A, our lakefront update. We're going to touch on that as well, but since you brought it up right now, I received emails from people as well that I'm friends with in town who pointed out the same thing. And Superintendent Gwynn and Katie Bradford at the lakefront very quickly addressed it with a tweak to the way they were staffing and placing people. And the following day, I got emails from the same people who witnessed it the day before, thanking us for the changes we made and how it made a huge difference in what they saw. So as we rolled out a beach season in a matter of 2.5 days with weird guidelines, we definitely know we were going to learn as we went, and we've been doing that, and the staff's been doing as President Anderson pointed out, a really, really good job despite very tough circumstances.
Yeah. Thank you.
It looks like somebody had cut a hole in the fence, Steve, up toward the north end, across from where the bench is on the sidewalk. It literally looked like there were 2 or 3 sections out of it.
That would be us. We cut that hole to have an entrance and an exit to keep people separate instead of creating a choke point where people had to potentially get close to each other.
Okay, good. I didn't know where that came from.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. All right, moving along.
Wait, I'm sorry. Commissioner Abbott has his hand up.
Oh, sorry.
I want to thank staff. I know taking down the old fences and putting up these snow fences puts a burden on staff. It's an aesthetic that I really appreciate, and I think it's great for Wilmette. And so I know it's harder on staff to do this, and I just want to thank you for staying with it, and and appreciate it. That's all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Steve, public comment coming through?
And at this point, we have nothing on the chat, so I think similar to what we did last time, we'll pause for a minute or two, ask people to type in the comments on the YouTube channel, see if we get any and read them, and then I'm going to try and do a better job of keeping my eyes on it as the meeting progresses here for the next 5-10 minutes, because there is a little bit of a delay. But comments made later in the meeting, we're not going to entertain those. This is the public comment section of the meeting. I'm not going to stay glued to the TV on my wall over there.
We had none between the time you put out your email and
Nope.
now.
No,
Okay.
none. So we'll just pause here for a minute. I'm going to shut off my camera so I don't feel weird, and we'll see if we get any public comments.
All right, who's going to do the Jeopardy music?
Got it.
Mike, go ahead, Mike. Since we're waiting, do we know that people are watching? Is there any way to know that?
Don't know.
I'm sure there's a way. I just don't know how.
Okay, so really all we know is that we're on this and other people might be.
Yeah, I know I have a feed going. I can see it exists. It is
Okay.
up there. But I do know there are a couple of people in the community who are interested in our next topic on the agenda who are probably watching, but I don't have the ability to digitally confirm that.
Okay.
And I'm going to guess, Steve, we'll get a bunch of comment after people hear the lakefront update in your section 6A, 6B, 6D. So,
And we can read those comments if the board would prefer that. All right, so at this point, we do not have any comments typed into the live chat on our YouTube channel.
okay, all right. Why don't we move to the next topic, the Shoreline Protection Project. And we've got Smith Group here. I think we have 3 individuals, Bill, Margaret, and Mark. Is Mark the other one? Yep, okay. So Brian Abbott, Commissioner Abbott, is the head of the Lakefront Committee, will be sort of leading us through this section and also Section 5 when we talk about Gilson.
Well, I have no update. I'm curious to hear it, and so I'm really going to turn it over to the consultants and to Steve. I know that they have questions for the board with regards to things like risk guarantees, what are we trying to accomplish, how much are we trying to control nature, or how much are we, so they're going to ask us questions and they'll lead to discussions amongst the board, and I think that's good. I think we'll find out, we'll take our temperature here.
Correct. And what the update I can give the board, which I believe I've already given, but just to set the table, Margaret, Mark, myself, and Superintendent Solberg walked the beach from Langdon to the harbor and had a great discussion. They took pictures. They asked a lot of questions. I gave a lot of answers. And I think that's informed a lot of the thought process they've had to date, but they want to confirm and have similar give and take with all of you before they really move this too much further. So with that being said, I'm not sure who from the Smith Group team is going to take the lead here. I do know that they have some slides that they want to share, and I do have to turn over sharing to someone at some point. I just don't know who at this point.
Thanks, Steve. So this is Mark, and thank you all for allowing us to join your meeting. I do have some slides that I'll run through. Steve, if you can give me that control. And Commissioner Abbott, you're absolutely right. We do have questions for the commissioners, and I'm hoping to be able to move through our material pretty quickly to allow the maximum amount of time for you to do that.
I believe you should be able to share now, Mark.
Yep. Okay. So hopefully everybody can see that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me see. There we go. I want to make sure that I can also see you. Good. Okay. So let's get right into it. If I can advance this. So there's really sort of 4 parts to what we wanted to talk about here. I want to just remind everybody of, what the sort of the scope and the goals were of the task that we've been given, and just take you through how some of the process is going to be. This is not the only time that we plan to come before this committee, so I want to show you, how our product gets introduced to you. I want to talk a little bit about some of the issues and opportunities. We'll spend a little bit of time looking at some pictures of some existing conditions just to kind of frame some of that discussion. And then, as we've already said, the committee goals and objectives is really the main portion that we're looking to get out of today. Now, you may all have questions for us and may want to immediately jump to a particular solution at a particular place. We're happy to entertain those questions. That isn't really the objective today, but like I said, we obviously will take those questions, but the idea is more to hear from you about your goals and objectives rather than individual particular solutions. And now I'm going backwards, not forwards. Here we go. So just very quickly, our scope is the visual assessment that Steve mentioned already. We've completed that. We're going to look at some existing documents that the Park District has related to sort of history at the beaches. We are going to conduct a desktop coastal analysis to have a look at some of the wave climate that's out there. We're going to examine a number of different shoreline stabilization strategies that could be implemented, and out of those we'll develop some alternatives and with a sort of a screening level cost to go with them. In terms of the meetings that we do in front of you, we have this today is this existing conditions meeting and your goals and objectives. The next time we would come before you, we would talk about some of these different stabilization strategies. And then the time after that, we would be looking at some more specific alternatives and what some of the regulatory requirements are associated with those. And then the last time would be when we would have really much more specific alternatives for you to perhaps make some kind of decision on. So you're all familiar with the areas that we have been asked to look at. We have Langdon at the north, obviously, which has this really interesting triangular shaped boundary at its southern end. So there's some interesting things there. There's some stormwater issues at Langdon, which we'll be looking at in terms of runoff from the upper portion of the park there. We are not looking at the privately owned shoreline in terms of coming up with particular stabilization strategies for the private land that's there. But having said that, we will kind of look at this whole coastal area as a single coastal unit. Okay. So we would perhaps examine maybe how sand, for example, would move in this area, but we aren't going to be coming up with particular solutions to problems that individual homeowners may have. That said, we certainly don't want to exclude anybody, and so, there may be an appropriate time to, as well as taking comment and questions from, everybody in the community to, to collaborate and engage with private ownership as well. It is, just a part of the physical system. So that's that. Then obviously we have the sailing beach, the swimming beach, being mindful of the village of Wilmette's water treatment plant that's here. Also being mindful of some of the major recent investments and improvements that the park has made. And then we have the South Beach area and some of the habitat edge here, which I believe later in the meeting you're going to be talking about some of this area with respect to a planning consultant. Some more stormwater issues in this area, and then at the end we have the aquatics beach and the dog beach at the mouth of the harbor. And so that is where we are. Our study stops. A couple of things we may talk about in the as we go through. You may hear us talk about revetments. A revetment is generally made of stone. It's armor protection that is on the slope. It extends up above the high water and it goes down below. So this is just an illustration of the term revetment. We're not necessarily proposing that anywhere, but if you hear it, I just want you to have an understanding of what that may be. So this at the bottom here is how a submerged breakwater. You may hear us use the term breakwater. It could be submerged completely under the water. It can also be emergent and stick up out of the water. And then I wanted to show you this photograph here. This is actually at Lake Forest. Again, we're not proposing this, but I do want you to see how structures that are in the lake and along the lake can influence the shape of the shoreline. And that's an important point, and we'll see that when we look at Langdon, for example, that there's structures to the north of that, and those will influence the shape of the shoreline. And then the other thing that I want to talk about, and I'll talk about this a little bit, is just the influence of the lake level. This is, at the moment, the absolute driving factor of what you're seeing out all along all along Lake Michigan, both in Illinois, in Wilmette, and all around. A couple of points at the bottom here. You can see a stylized cross section that shows a low water condition, a high water condition, and then a condition where we have waves, storm event on top of that high water condition. The profile is the same throughout, you'll see here, and a lot of times people say, where has the beach gone? The answer is the beach is still there, it just is underwater and you can't see it. And these photographs at the top sort of illustrate that. This is 2 shots of the exact same beach from the exact same point. During low water levels, you can see that there's a large, wide, expansive beach that's visible. At the high water level, that's covered up. And so that's just one thing to remember when we talk about, an area like Langdon and all along the water. The beach is not necessarily gone just because a person who visits the beach can't see it. There is still, still sand under the water. But one of the things that's...
Mark, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I do have a commissioner who raised their hand. Commissioner Murdoch raised his hand. Oh, you need to unmute. There you go, Mike.
I'm good. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. I had a question about that because I believe I heard you say at one of your presentation in the past that if the water level gets to a certain height, it can actually pull the sand out. And that may be relevant in terms of our discussions about Langdon, that right now all of that sand at Langdon is still there. But if it hits past, I don't remember if you said 5 feet or whatever, but at some point the wave action, rather than pushing sand in, tends to take sand out. And once it's gone, it's gone. Could you talk a little bit about that for us?
Yes, so that's absolutely true. And when we have these storm events, and you can see down here in the bottom right corner here, where you see that you have the high water condition with a storm event. There's 2 things that are going on here. One, because the water is deeper, it can support a much bigger wave. And that also will mean that you can have much, much higher wave energy that reaches the shore. So that, so then during those storm events, you're getting then much more erosion up in these areas because you have so much more energy. So it's true, we have both things going on. We have the beach being inundated by the high water level, but then we also do have erosion taking places, and there's some quite, there are definitely parts of the system here that have undergone quite significant erosion. Some of it's very noticeable in some of the private properties, for example, where there are structures or trees, other indicators, and you can kind of see where the beach, where the sand was and now where it isn't. So, and that sand, can get pulled offshore, and it can get moved downshore with the direction of the littoral drift. So yes, both things are going on. The sand can be moved around, but also it can be that it's just been covered. And as we move from the winter into the spring and summer, we're already beginning to see that in lots of places, those more gentle waves are beginning to push a lot of the sand back up onto the beach. So you'll note beaches will have sort of a winter profile and a summer profile. So for example, the sheet pile that's been exposed during the winter in the South Beach, that a lot of that now has been recovered up again as the water begins to push some of that sand back up. So it's pretty complex set of processes going on. Is that to answer the question? Yeah, good. Okay. Thank you for that. So I wanted to just point out historically where we are with respect to lake levels. This chart is something that the Corps of Engineers puts out every month. The blue line is the long-term average for Lake Michigan. The dark black lines here indicate the monthly record highs, and at the bottom here, the monthly lows. So down, this is probably hard to read, but in 2012, 2013, we actually experienced some record low water on Lake Michigan. And now every month so far of this year, we have actually broken the monthly record all the way through. And it looks like as we move forward, so the solid red line is what's actually been measured. The green line is the projection for the future, and this red bars here indicate some amount of uncertainty about future water levels. And this is a prediction going on about 6 months into the future. It's updated every month. So a couple things that you can see here. We were at high water, or relatively high, above average in 2018. And then we had a very unusually steep rise in spring last year, a lot of rain in the basin. And then we had very little decline through the summer and fall. And now we enter the period where we begin to see an increase again. So the lake is at, record high. And if we look a little bit more closely, these are daily averages from a gauge right down at Calumet Harbor. And here you can see we get a lot of fluctuation just over time. We don't stay at that average all the time. And so you can see some of these peaks here are associated with storm events where the wind and atmospheric conditions will tend to push the water up one way or another in the lake. So when we have storms from the north that create large waves at our beaches, those often coincide with increases in water. So this one is Halloween last year. This is at beginning of December, and then this one was January, which was probably the most significant. And then here you can see just at the end of April, we had another peak.
Mark, don't mean to stop you again, but Vice President Goebel has her hand up.
Yep, please.
Thank you. Mark, this is really fascinating. And it's interesting to see it follow a routine pattern over time. How do these patterns compare to 10 or 15 or 20 years ago?
That's a really good question. I can see that Margaret is smiling on the screen because she sent me a really terrific image that I didn't include in this. So, there isn't a set pattern. There's quite a lot of kind of unpredictability and chaos but it is a very large system, and it does go through cycles of generally high and generally low. And what we often have seen is that there's around about a 20-year cycle between having a few years at a peak level and then declining, a period of low water, and then another period of high water. So we do typically see these cycles. And if I go back to the previous slide, the difference here between the monthly record high and the monthly record low for the same month, it's generally about a 6-foot range that we tend to see in the still water level. On any given year, we would normally expect to see about a 1-foot increase in the summer compared to the winter. And then, like we've said, there is a lot of fluctuation over kind of longer term timescales. And then just the next slide that I have, because a lot of people ask this question, what's going to happen in the future? I don't know is the short answer. But this gentleman here, Dr. Gromwald, is one of the foremost researchers out of the University of Michigan, and he looks at Great Lakes water levels. He's got some really good material on YouTube and some other places, but he looks at the impacts of different physical processes on water levels, both evaporation and precipitation and ice cover. And when he looks out into the future, what he would say is this statement: a possibility of a future with increased variability is supported by current observation. So what he's saying is that we can expect some higher highs, some lower lows, and potentially, some more rapid alternation between those. So that maybe that typical period of maybe 20 years between high water, maybe that's going to change as well. But there really is very little way to make an accurate prediction about what we're going to be looking at beyond about 6 months into the future. And so this is when on this chart here, where the Corps of Engineers makes their prediction, they look at, sort of a low precipitation future and a high precipitation future, and then, their prediction is kind of in the middle here. But even if it didn't rain again for the rest of the spring and the summer, there's so much water in Lake Superior that's coming down to us. There's so much water in the basin that's on its way to the lakes. We're going to continue to see a rise, and we are going to be at higher than usual levels all the way through this summer. Even if we do have this lowest end of the forecast, but by the time we get to the fall, beginning of the winter, we would still be a long way above average. So for the immediate future, we know that we're going to be faced with high lake levels, at least through next winter, and then remains to be seen after that.
Mark, Commissioner Abbott has a question for you as well.
I love this chart here. They're showing, generally they're predicting that it's going down. Now that seems to be a seasonal falling off. That green line, tracks with most seasonal.
Yes.
So I don't know if they've got much of a crystal ball, or they're just saying, well, seasonally, this is what we expect. That's one question as follow-up. But is there any intelligence here, or is that just a seasonal prediction?
It's generally a seasonal prediction. They also look at what's going on around the basin. If Lake Superior is at a particularly high level, then the rate at which water is coming out of Lake Superior into Lakes Michigan and Huron is also affected. So
that is a variable to factor in. It was flat through the winter, despite the very low amount of ice cover, which really surprised me. I was like, why won't this water go down? And what was causing that? Just increased precipitation?
So there's a couple things. I think because we had a warm winter, two things were going on. One, we did the precipitation that we got, and again, it's not just the precipitation that falls, in Illinois, it's what falls across most of the basin is really Michigan. Illinois contributes actually very little water to Lake Michigan, but it was warm. So what might have typically fallen in as snow and then remained as snow, and then melted in the spring and summer, and then found its way through rivers down into the lakes. This is kind of what often this represents, is that precipitation is now being locked kind of in storage.
I see.
Through these colder months. We didn't have much of that, and so that's why this is relatively flat. Then the other thing is that the greatest evaporation takes place when we have the really cold differential between, kind of the warm lake in October, November, and then that very frigid air, that temperature gradient. And so we didn't get a lot of that really dramatic gradient that drives evaporation. So I think those two things probably contributed to this staying very flat. Normally we would expect it to drop about a foot from a peak in July to a low point here. And like you said, it barely dropped at all. And
that's really bedeviled us.
Trajectory back up again.
That flat spot really hurt. Okay. I appreciate this discussion, because I think as you poll these commissioners, you're going to find that they're, so how risky, how much guarantee is going to be very much, key to this question. Even if you can't quite answer it, I appreciate you spending some time here on this.
Yeah. So that's probably enough, probably more than you expected on lake levels, but it does drive a lot of what takes place. So we'll move off that. And we'll just look quickly through some existing conditions, and then I want to get on to kind of asking you your thoughts. So we'll move from Langdon, and we'll move north to south. So these shots were taken last September. This is at the bottom of the bluff, and then this was November after a storm. You can see that there had been, significant amount of erosion, and the rocks in the background here. This kind of is a demarcation, more or less, of the Park District's property line. It's that triangular angled line that goes out in front of some of the private properties that's further back. I actually didn't, Steve, put in shots here that from May, but I think these tell the story of what's going on. Obviously, Langdon right now is closed off. It's not accessible, it very much looks like that graphic that we showed at the beginning, with the water right up to the base here. We'll look quickly at the sailing beach. There's two shots here. This one is at the end of last summer in September, and then this again is after a storm. You can see that the water level had come up during the storm. The waves had run up the beach, and then a lot of water had collected down in this area, in the boat storage area, just in front of the water treatment plant. And in fact, this image looks a little strange because I had to make a composite from a video, but this is in the January storm, and the water had come all the way up through the sort of the low spot there at the edge of the sailing beach, kind of at the boundary between the sailing and the swimming beach, and this entire area of the parking lot was flooded. I have some other video of this, and I think there was some video was posted at that time on Facebook and other places. They're large files. You can do some of those with Steve if those are helpful for people to look at. Moving further south, at Gilson again, you can see kind of that September sunny day. Lake level is high, but there's no dramatic wave action. And then this is a day after a storm, and you can see here that there's kind of debris been left in a line that shows where the water had kind of gotten up to. So this was November, and you can see that the beach house here, was up out of that zone. I actually stood here in January during that storm, and the waves were kind of running up to here and then stopping. And so the structure obviously weathered that particular storm. But if the lake level were to rise, beyond what we saw last winter, and we were to get another big storm, the building is it's sort of at the edge of where we have seen the water level come up to. This is going down into the South Beach area. You can see this is just the beginnings of that sheet pile line becoming visible. Again, this is a September shot. You can see here in November, there's been movement of sand and some of that erosion that we had talked about. You can see that you see how close the dune grasses were in September to the line where the sheep pile is, and then you can see over the course of this is probably 2 or 3 storms, quite a lot of that material has been eroded. But the dune grasses here have definitely slowed down the erosion. Oh, I missed a shot, sorry. So this is again at the south, but you can see here, this is February, probably when the most of the sheep pile was exposed. I meant to put one in here showing it being covered up now. So a lot of this has now been since covered with the lake pushing sand back up. I apologize for that. And then down at the south, we have there's the pier that separates, or the breakwater groin structure that separates the aquatics area. And this area we've seen very little change because I think it's protected by the 2 structures that are there. So here we have tended to see very little loss of material there. So that's just a very quick visual tour of the areas that we're looking at. And when we get into the goals and objectives, I don't want to guide your discussion particularly, but there are some areas that you can use for discussion points if you so wish. You know, we're very much interested in hearing about your priorities. We're interested in hearing about, you know, how you might think about temporary or short-term measures versus a longer-term change to the area. As we've said, the lake levels do go up and down. We're at this high period right now. We're expecting high water into for the next while, but that doesn't mean that the water level won't go down again. But it also doesn't mean it isn't going to go higher. So anyway, so there's a whole discussion around the time scale. Obviously, a lot of different uses going on across these areas. You know, from human use and different human uses to different ecology, habitat. So we're very interested in your thoughts around those and which ones perhaps belong more in certain areas. And then lastly, we're very interested in your views of the built infrastructure, whether that's protecting existing infrastructure, modifying existing infrastructure, adding new features of some kind, whether those are sort of protective structures or to, increase revenue potential. We're interested in all of those things. And so, we're obviously happy to take more questions. We're also very happy to listen to your discussion. But that's the end of the remarks that we had prepared.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you to the board. Am I on? You can hear me?
Yes.
All right. So appreciate. I really wanted everybody to hear this because Gilson is Gilson, right? And I think it's important that the board get all the information. There's going to be more meetings, but there are some questions here in front of us. So I don't know if I'm moderating this, but this slide is good. Steve, do you want to do this, or I'll do this?
I'll help you if, as people are raising their hands, I'll chime in and let you know. But okay. Otherwise, I believe President Anderson said you were going to run this part of the meeting. Sure.
So, Mark, could use a little bit of help in terms of what are the questions with regard to priorities? Ask us questions.
Sure. Well, let's start with one. It's, we've described several different, geographic portions of the study area. So we have Langdon, we have the sailing beach, we have Gilson, the swimming beach, we have South Beach, if you were not able to, add, improve, modify, all of those to the extent you wanted, which geographically are the most important to the community, to your revenue, to your operating budget, so that we could start geographically.
Geographically. That'd be good. But Andy, I'll jump in.
Schisler has his hand up, Brian, if you want to go ahead.
Go ahead, Todd.
So my job on a full-time basis is a realtor, and whenever I'm working with clients to buy a house, they come in and they look at the house and they say, "Gosh, you know what? I would really like the sink of the kitchen to be over here," or "I'd really like to," and they come up with this whole plan to get what they think they want, and they talk to the builders, and frequently the builder would have said, "Gosh, we could have done this so much cheaper if you only said that this is your end goal, and just come to me and say, here's the problem, how do I solve it?" So with that being the case, what do you think gives us the most bang for our buck, and what would you say is the most appropriate thing to if you were in charge as the consultant, what would your emphasis be? Where would your focus be? What would you stay away from? How would you handle this problem?
So is now the time that I hand it over to my colleagues? So, can I'm certainly very happy to answer that question. I'd also would, I will, but I also would like to hear from you all first, because I don't want to sort of put words in your mouth.
We know what's important. This is my first beach project in my life. It's not just for us, pat on the back, but it's for our community. And maybe I don't want to overlook certain things, and so I'm happy to give you input, but I also love to hear your input. If you were God, what would you be doing? And we're
Oh my goodness! Now you've really given me some. How about I'm just Mark Wagstaff, resident of Wilmette.
Real quick, I think our President Anderson wants to jump in real quick before we move past this.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Schisler's question is a good one, but I think Mark trying to defer it till later is a good move as well. I see what he's trying to do, and I think that's probably the best way to approach it.
Yeah. So before I throw it back to Commissioner Abbott, who just put up his hand, I think, Mark, if we could do similar to what we did physically, kind of virtually, and I think that's what you meant by like literal locations. When we were standing at Langdon, you very specifically said, what are your goals for this property? Is your goal to always have a usable swimming beach here, no matter what the lake levels and water is doing, or is your goal to protect the bluff and the parkland above the bluff? And I gave you my answer, but then I very quickly said, well, you also need to get that input from the elected officials. And so maybe if we could just do that virtual walk together, and you can ask those questions, people can give you answers.
Sure. Maybe it would be helpful if I put up the if I went back to this slide here, and we can just do that, and then we have a visual reference. So so if we go to Langdon, there's a couple of things here that are going on. One is we have this private development to the north that sticks out into the lake and has a lot of very hard structure edge. So that interrupts the natural sand supply, and that's why we see that this area here has undergone some of the most change. So if your goal, like Steve said, is to always have an available swimming beach at Langdon, then that requires some kind of intervention that would would involve some sort of structure, some kind of, nourishment here. It would, be a coastal infrastructure investment of some kind, whether that's something, an offshore breakwater or something else. On the other hand, that we have the bluff edge here that is now being, threatened, and then when the, periods of lower water level, a lot of the sand that's here would then be, exposed back again for use. So if we start here, I think that's a great question, is, what would be your priorities for the uses at Langdon?
Sure.
Steve, what was your answer to that?
My answer was that, Langdon wasn't always a swimming beach because of prior higher lake levels and prior, as you see all those rocks in his picture earlier, prior efforts to fortify the bluff from erosion. And we're kind of fortunate in this community to have Gilson, which is a larger beach and is available to our public as well. So my opinion was the effort should be more geared towards fortifying the bluff versus building out into the water to try and create a permanent beach despite whatever the water is doing. But that's also just one man's opinion.
Yeah.
Commissioner Clark has her hand up.
Okay. Am I unmuted? Okay. I tend to agree with, I tend to agree with you with regard to Langdon, that is a low priority to be restored as a swimming beach, that the bluff is more high priority based both on the, the fact, that it was not a swimming beach for many, many years, that the neighbors in that area do not like it being a public beach, and that I think also that, so bring back, and I suppose to say to some extent also the fact that the referendum failed. I think there's a much more interest by, the community as a whole, or Wilmette does not see that as high priority as a useful swimming beach. So to me, I would agree with you that that for Langdon, the bluff preservation is the more important aspect up there.
Great. Mark, I've got a bunch of hands up, so I'm just going to go right down the list. Commissioner Murdoch, you had your hand up?
Yes. And actually, I was trying to ask a question a little while ago, and
I'm sorry, I missed
to it. No, it's okay. But I was concerned with the amount of erosion we saw both at South Beach and at the Bluff. We're talking about the Bluff right now. What's going to happen if we do nothing? Because it seems like in the last year, we've seen a tremendous amount of erosion, and what's going to happen before we're able to do anything of consequence, because it's obviously going to take us some time to do that. How bad are things going to get in the near term with that Bluff?
I'm going to start answering that, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Margaret, who is really even more, much more expert in the coastal processes and does a lot of the coastal modeling. So I'm just going to give her a heads up that she's on deck in a minute. But I think you bring up a really good point. I think that the do nothing option is always one that should be looked at. It's always, a potential option. I think in this instance, the fact that we know we're going to have a period of high lake level that's going to extend at least through another winter in all likelihood, and and maybe beyond that. So that fact, coupled with the fact that to do interventions that go out into the lake substantially, the permitting process associated with those is more significant. I think some kind of temporary, more of an emergency type of protection is one of the tools in the toolbox that you probably want to look at, both at Langdon, and at the South Beach area. There's some areas here where it's quite low, and while the water hasn't gotten yet from the storms up to the drive here? It certainly could. So I think looking at sort of quicker, temporary type of what we might call like an emergency sort of intervention is certainly something that you might want to consider. There is a downside there that it doesn't give you that, long, by definition, doesn't give you long-term protection for the next, 30 years. So it maybe is a partial solution in the interim. But Margaret, do you want to maybe, you can be God and tell us what's going to happen.
Sure. And forgive me, I've only been to Langdon once, and I didn't review the pictures before the meeting, but I believe the backup beach is mostly rock. Am I correct in that?
Right.
So if it's rock and waves are hitting it, it's a lot like the Pacific Ocean. That's not going to go anywhere. The rock is pretty stable. Now, if it was compressed sediments and clay and silts, as we see on much of Lake Michigan, that's erodable. And what happens is the toe erodes out, and the bluff wants to restabilize, so there will be a slip failure, and you will lose land at the top of the bluff. But as rock, it's just hitting that rock. But it's also reflecting, and when it reflects, it pushes energy back out to the lake, which takes sediment with it. So I'm not surprised at all that this was the first location to lose all of its sediment and just disappear. Now, as Mark was saying, there are two processes going on when water levels come up. There's a cross-shore movement and a longshore movement. Our littoral transport is a longshore movement. So sediment that is offshore gets pulled offshore and continues down the way. But when water level comes up, it erodes that softer sediment and pulls it off of the shoreline and tries to flatten the beach because it feels better when it's flat. So it pushes that sediment off, and then the longshore transport moves it down. What's nice about that, though, is as it moves down, new stuff is behind it to take its place. So for Langdon, when the water levels go back down, that beach will reappear. So if you are not in immediate danger of that slope failing, you close off the beach. There's not much you can do. Now, if you want to maintain a beach and you say, we need a beach, you need an offshore structure. You need something that's going to break that wave energy, that's going to hold that sediment. Anything along the bluff is not going to do that. That's not what its intended purpose is. We like to talk about structures as offensive or defensive. And defensive means that we're defending just the critical infrastructure. That's your revetments at the back of the beach. Your offensive is trying to hold that beach in place because that beach is the protection for the bluff. But it's always a higher risk. So I know I gave you a really long answer to your short question, but that does take me to the South Beach where that does become important, where you see that there's a bit of an erosion. There's there's rock becoming exposed of previous buried revetments that were put in a while ago. And they are just becoming re-exposed over time because our water levels, again, are high. So this was a problem previously. People put in revetments and then the sand came in and covered it. Well, now those are re-exposed. So as Mark was saying, we can do a temporary structure to keep water from going over the top of those historic revetments, or to continue to wash it out, because many of those revetments are actually very poor quality and just kind of starting to crumble and pull away. Or you can put in your permanent defensive structure, a new revetment in its place. That does not hold the beach. It's a defensive structure. If we start looking that we want to hold the beach as a defense for the revetment, for that shoreline, we're looking offshore again. We're pushing a little bit further out. Again, really long answer, but I hope that answered your question.
Yep.
All right, Commissioner Wolf, I believe you were next.
I was back to what you were asking before. I guess I agreed with Commissioner Clark in saying that my goal at Langdon would be to protect the bluff and the park above. Well, I think it would be great to have a beach down there. If it's not feasible with just kind of minimal effort, then I think we just kind of let nature take its course there as long as we're protecting the land around it.
Agreed.
Commissioner Abbott, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I'm going to basically, I'm falling in line with other people. There are, first off, we've been blessed with what we consider to be a pretty natural, we know it's not really natural, but a very natural shoreline, and maintaining the feel of that natural shoreline, I think, is certainly important to me. In terms of what my nightmares are, my nightmare is losing Langdon Park, and the other nightmare is losing the beach house. Losing those would be absolute nightmare scenarios. So I'm really strongly leaning towards mostly a defensive strategy to make sure those don't happen. With regard to recreation, I don't want to sacrifice that natural feel for what seems to be the ebb and flow of nature. If we don't have a swimming beach 10% of the time, then we don't have a swimming beach, particularly down at Langdon, which does seem to be, Langdon seems to be the canary in the mine. If we're going to lose sand, we lose it there first and it comes back. It's the most variable of our beaches. So I love Margaret, you were talking about defensive structures. I was nodding along with that. I want to make sure we protect our built environment and our parks. I'm less concerned that we have to have recreation, swimming, even sailing, going 100% of the time. I don't want to sacrifice the natural feel. The idea of offshore revetments is troubling to me. No, that's my priority.
Great. Anyone else? I think we started at Langdon. Anyone else who want to chime in on Langdon with a different opinion, or generally we're protecting the bluff? Is that the priority we want to communicate to the folks?
Is there a way to do both protect the bluff and the beach? I mean, if we were to say, hey, the bluff is a priority, and I tend to actually lean that way, but gosh, it would be nice to have the beach too. I mean, is there a way that, is it either or?
So I think if we want to have the beach available under pretty much any water level condition, then that requires one of these offensive structures and approaches that Margaret has mentioned, which, according to Commissioner Abbott, are also a little offensive. But that would be something out in the water, whether that's a stone breakwater of some kind, but we would have to, we would definitely have to reduce the wave energy that was coming from offshore before it got to the beach area in order to hold the sand. If we're more interested just in protecting the land and reinforcing the toe of the bluff, then that's something that we could put, whether it's armor stone or some other products that are available along the toe of the bluff that would then protect that energy, protect the bluff from that energy, but then that leaves the sand. It's only there when the water level is lower.
And are the costs significantly different from those two options?
Yes, to build out into the water and to have something again that would be significant enough to maintain a beach during, pretty much any water level would be a fairly substantial structure.
Vice President Goebel?
Yes, I just wanted to add and amplify what has been shared already. The idea of Langdon leaving has always been troubling for me. It's one of our favorites, both as a family, but I know of many other people. And if there was an intermediate solution, such as protecting the bluff, having some access to the beach, perhaps not as a swimming beach, but maybe similar to Elmwood Dunes, I think that would be appealing. Certainly all of our choices have a cost, so I want to learn and be mindful of what improves and maintains what we have, and it also is a fiscally appropriate decision.
President Anderson?
I'm going to be very consistent with everybody else. I think having a swimming beach there is a bonus, but it's not something that you would strive to get, I don't think. And certainly protection of the bluff is necessary. And I would agree with Vice President Goebel that the ability to at least get down there is something that we should have, whether or not we have a swimming beach there.
All right, Commissioner Murdoch, I think you were next, and then Commissioner.
Oh, can I ask, just had a follow-up question. My understanding is the sand action is sort of from north to south. So I just wanted to make sure the revetments that our neighbors have put in place, there's at least a couple of them now. Do they impact us at all? We're north of them, or is it really no impact because it's sort of diluted by the time it gets to the sailing beach?
So you're talking about some of the relatively recent structures that have been placed immediately south of Langdon?
Yes.
So
I would consider those to be fairly offensive too. Yes.
So those kind of have a couple of different, I would say, features. One is they tend to cause more erosion on either side of them because you have that one very hard reinforced edge, and then the waves kind of tend to ride around that, and without an appropriate kind of flank, you tend to get erosion on either side of that. So that they may have some detrimental effect in the very near vicinity. They may also, so that while you're right that the sand predominantly will move from north to south, it does depend on the wind and the wave direction. So what often happens is during the summer, when we have more frequently winds with a southerly and easterly component, it's not a strong wave action, but that will tend to move sand back up here. And then it's the larger storms from the north and northeast during the winter that tend to move, they drive most of it. And so the balance is always this way. But in the summer, there is some movement back up, and that will interrupt that to some extent. But they don't, it more impacts people's ability to move up and down the beach.
And is that, there's a number of people there, obviously, that live on the lake. They have the means to do whatever they want. Do they also have the ability legally to do whatever they want so we could get more of these revetments?
They don't have the ability to do whatever they want. There's a number of permitting agencies that have jurisdiction. So very quickly, the Corps of Engineers has jurisdiction over waters of the U.S., and Lake Michigan is waters of the U.S., and so they have to get a permit from the Corps or go through the Corps' permit approval process. The state also has jurisdiction. The state of Illinois holds the entire lake bed in trust for the public, and so regardless of where the water level is, any submerged land is the property of the state. So that means there's not a fixed property line. It moves with the water. And so in periods of low water, then, a property owner, their property may extend out to here. In periods of high water, it actually, that line recedes back. Anyway, all of that. So the state also has jurisdiction, and you're not allowed to create new land as a private person, and you're not allowed to put structures in the lake that will create new land as a private entity. The municipal and public entities can work with the state to get permission to create new land as long as it's publicly available. So the Chicago Park District, for example, over the last 20 years has added several acres of new parkland, and other municipalities have done similar things, but private cannot. And then lastly, at the local level, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District's watershed ordinance also has some riparian requirements, and some municipalities have taken on the role. So I'm not sure in Wilmette whether the village of Wilmette has taken on those responsibilities on behalf of the Water Reclamation District, but regardless, anything within 50 feet of the lake edge, the Water Reclamation District will also have a jurisdiction. So that's a lengthy answer, but no, private people cannot do whatever they want.
Okay, thank you. And a follow-up question for Steve then. We know how kind of the first new revetment, or in this case it was just a replacing of an existing permitted revetment, I think. But the other one that I'm thinking of further north from that, is that also a similar kind of situation where they got permitted and were able to do it because they had something there, or is that another process they went through?
I'm not sure when you say the other one farther north, which are you speaking of?
There's one that's been built in the last few months that's huge.
Right, they're just south of Langdon.
Yes.
Yes, and that was the repair one. That's how that permit was filed.
Okay, and then there's another one further down the beach that I thought was the first one, no?
There is some other rock structures down the beach. Some are intended to be rock structures. Some are not at all intended to be revetments. There are actually landscape features that have been consumed by lake action. But what's left looks like a failed revetment, but that was never the intent.
Okay. So we won't be getting anything more other than what the lake might uncover or move around.
Correct.
Okay.
I think Commissioner Murdoch, I was going to you.
Okay. I very much would like to see a swimming beach up at Langdon, but as I think Brian had said, I don't really want to see a structure into the lake, so it sounds like that eliminates that possibility. I'm not sure I want to spend the money that it might cost either. But picking up on what Julia had said, I think we would really like an access point there if it can be done, because so many people have walked that whole stretch of the lakefront in the past, and you really can't do that at this point. So if there's a way that we can allow that access again, I think that would be highly desirable.
Okay, thank you. And then I said I was going to go to Commissioner Abbott after Murdoch, and then I'll go to Commissioner Schisler. Oh, sorry, Brian. It's not unmuting you on my side.
Now can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I just want to agree with Goebbels and Murdoch that access at Langdon Beach is, yes, I would put that a very high priority as well. You did mention underwater breakwaters. It seems a little, I'm not sure. It seems, I don't know if I want to get off on a discussion of underwater breakwaters. Is that a thing? Is that real? I don't want to pin my hopes on it because, anyway, that's a question. And I'll leave it back to Mark.
So the short answer is yes, they are a thing. Yes, they are effective. But generally speaking, the higher the breakwater, the more effective it's going to be. And so the ones that are submerged tend to, during periods of high water level, they will allow, wave energy to ride right over them. More than one that's emergent, but they certainly are a thing, and there are several examples. Again, it's a trade-off between cost, aesthetics, and efficacy.
Commissioner Schisler?
If there was something near Langdon that did, a breakwater, for example, how far south down the beach would that help protect? In other words, would it have any influence whatsoever? And I think I know the answer, but on Gilson?
So I don't think it would have a particular impact on Gilson, and in order to be permitted, you'd have to demonstrate that it wouldn't have any detrimental effect on the neighbors, either to the north or the south. So I think it would be, fair to say it wouldn't have an impact on Gilson.
Okay. I thought that was the answer, but hey, you know what?
Yep.
Why rule it out if that's the solution? So just brainstorming.
Yep.
Again, to Commissioner Abbott, again, I'm unable, nope, you put your hand down. Okay, no hand up. All right. I think that, so I'm just scrolling through all of you real quick. I see Margaret physically putting her hand up. Margaret, if you could unmute yourself. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So what I just wanted to add to this whole conversation is that we should start thinking about the beach also as a defense measure for the bluff, because that's what it does. It's just a high-risk, erodable structure. In natural circumstances, we have dunes behind beaches that are naturally erodible and replenish beaches as storm systems and higher waters erode them away. So it's always a high risk to try to maintain a recreational beach as a defense measure for that bluff. The beach is the defense. We use it recreationally, but if there is something to protect the beach, it in turn protects the bluff. So it's just at a much higher risk. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, and so some communities have used the strategy of beach nourishment, where they don't add a structure, but they bring in additional sand to place so that you have that beach available. And as Margaret says, it will over time erode away. So you have that. It won't last as long as a conventional structure, but it will give you a certain amount of protection for a certain length of time. So I know Margaret's worked with Highland Park recently to using beach nourishment as a strategy to get through this period of particularly high water levels.
With the beach nourishment, how long until it does erode away? And I mean, is it just keep throwing it? It seems cheaper, but it seems like it's the faucet's on, and you might not ever be turning that off.
Well, it is a higher risk because as the water level continues to go up, which we expect it to do until July, naturally that's when it crests and then it'll start to go back down. We don't know what next year will bring. If water levels remain that high, it'll continue to erode it away. But we want to work with nature, and we know that larger grain sizes are more stable. So your beach sand is generally around a 0.3 millimeter. If we increase that to a 1 millimeter, that will want to stay. It will want to stay more, let's say. It will have a higher retention time. So there's ability to put in nourishment that might be a little coarser, but it will give you that small amount of recreational space for a time. Nothing is permanent when it comes to these soft approaches. Well, I should say nothing is without risk. Water level goes back down, it'll be there.
Commissioner Abbott.
I would be curious about nourishment. It'd be one of the options that I would like to get pricing on. And so I don't know. Have we answered your question with regard to priorities? I don't want to cut off other commissioners, but there were 4 things up there that you wanted to get through.
Well, we've definitely hit on a lot of them. Let me go back to the things. We've definitely talked around this idea of temporary versus long-term with respect to Langdon, but I mean, the same is true elsewhere. So, there's things like, nourishment is kind of an in-between. It's not entirely temporary, but it certainly, isn't really long-term. We've talked a lot about, sort of built infrastructure in terms of different opinions around, adding structures, changing the sort of the aesthetic, and also protecting what's there. We have talked to, I think we've said that Langdon is somewhat of a lesser priority, while not unimportant, but somewhat lesser than than perhaps the swimming and the sailing beach. We haven't talked too much about different or new use, human uses. Obviously, there's swimming, sailing. There is an area that is, given over predominantly to, habitat. But I that would be an area that we might want to talk a little bit about. Are there new uses that don't currently exist that you would like the beach to support? Be there, restaurants or, other sort of revenue generating kinds of things, fishing piers, the areas that perhaps should have less human involvement and be given further over to, ecology and habitat. All of those are open for discussion.
Sorry, I wasn't scrolling through and looking at everybody. Commissioner Abbott, go ahead.
Sure. I'm not going to speak for others. I'm satisfied with the ecology, habitat, and uses that our lakeshore supports. Never want to miss a trick, but when we went through Amy knows because she was here. I mean, we went through the master plan before. People were asking about restaurants and other uses. Oh, the pier. There was a $2 million pier, and so I feel that in my mind, we gave those consideration and went said no. But we have 5 other commissioners here who never considered these things. So I will say I'm satisfied with the way it is, but I'll turn it over to others and let them weigh in.
President Anderson?
I would agree with what Brian just said. We're not looking to add anything, and certainly the feedback we got during the referendum and since then has been pretty consistent that, a light touch is as much as we want to put on it. And anything, the idea of a restaurant is just, I think, an anathema to most everybody who's out there. And not to mention just the cost related to it as well.
Commissioner Wolf, there you go.
I was just going to say basically the same thing that Brian said. We looked at this extensively years ago, and the majority of the population at the time wanted to keep things the way they are, more natural and passive. Although I would say if there are other things, and you brought up like fishing, if there's a way to incorporate some new activities without incurring any costs or any additional structures or things like that, I'm sure that the community would be open to new experiences down there, just other ways to enjoy the area in a peaceful way.
Great. Commissioner Clark, there you go.
Okay, sorry. I was actually going to say something similar to Amy, because I would make the comment, generally restaurants or other activities, I don't think there's much of a demand in the community for this, but I have been seeing a lot of fishermen down there, especially by the harbor. So I guess I am bringing that up as a possibility of some type of a way of increasing the availability for people to actually fish off that area, because I've seen a lot of people fishing off on the very south end on the Dog Beach. And then I just wanted to bring back when we were talking about different areas for, of priorities of different areas as we're walking south along the beach, and we've already gone over Langdon. And of course, like the swimming beach and the sailing beach, of course, are fairly high priorities. But I would also like to I guess use the term of the free beach. So we're not quite at the South Beach, the Aquatics Beach and Dog Beach yet, but just to the north of that, because at least what I've seen when I've walked along that, there's been a lot of erosion on that, and I think that's an area that is very heavily used by residents during the summertime. So I think that's some concern, and would like to have some focus on that area. So that's it.
Great, and I'll just chime in. You are all saying almost exactly what I told Mark and Margaret when we walked. There was a question earlier, what was my answer? My answer was largely, we want to have a swimming beach, we want to have a sailing beach.
Yep.
We want to, and the only thing I would add that really hasn't been discussed here tonight is we don't own the Rock Pier, the Rock
Yep.
Jetty. That's a part of MWRD structures under lease to, I believe, the harbor. But what that's doing, and as you saw in the slides earlier, we haven't had much change in the landscape down there, and a lot of that has to do with that structure. And if that structure was to fail or get overwhelmed by lake levels, we would then see rapid change to the landscape of what we call aquatics beach and dog beach. And I think those are very heavily used and valued by our community. So I think we need to continue looking at ways to make sure we preserve that area as well, as much as the swimming beach or sailing beach, in my opinion. Commissioner Wolf?
I was just going to piggyback on what you said. I know in the past, we've, as Commissioner Abbott mentioned, we looked at the cost of repairing or rebuilding that, and it's extremely expensive, given that it's not ours. Is there a way that we could ask the MWRD to make sure that it's shored up, or to do some sort of a closer look to make sure that it's not going to fail anytime soon, and then work with them or help them so that they can make sure that it's not going to fail and impact a lot of other things?
Yes, I think that's the right approach. And I want to remind, because Commissioner Abbott quoted the $2 million project, that was to replace what's there with a walkout pier to facilitate pit fishing, like it once was before the rock was dumped on top of then failing walkout pier. So the cost of fortifying what's there today, I'm sure Smith Group can help us with and understand the difference between what we looked at before and what we're looking at now. I can't, but they can. So I think that those are all good options. And I do agree that since it's not under our ownership, we should be looking to others to help facilitate that process.
Thanks.
Commissioner Smith? Go ahead, Todd.
So it sounds like it's not as much of an erosion issue with the sand as much as the sand is hidden under high water. Number one, is that correct? And number two is, if that is correct, and or if it's erosion, should we also look at possibly pushing sand back up towards the bluff when we have low water?
So it's definitely both, and I think some of the pictures that we showed of the South Beach area.
Erosion and high water?
Yes. So here you're seeing the fact that in September the top of this sheet pile was barely visible, and the dune here was quite close. So we have seen both. We have definitely have seen erosion during the winter, but at the same time, some of that, or a large amount of that sand that's been lost from this area has not been lost from the entire system, and we've begun to see some of that being sort of pushed back up the beach. In terms of sort of harvesting sand during the low water period, anything that's below the ordinary high water mark is still regulated. And so kind of stealing from that area, even if it's, dry land, would still be a regulated activity. That's not to say that you couldn't do it, and we have definitely seen, some communities will frequently, dredge from the sort of, the southern end of that area and move the sand back up to the north. The state did that for a long time at Illinois Beach State Park. They try to capture it at the south, bring it back up to the north, and then it would work its way down again. So so I mean, there have been examples of people doing that, but it's not entirely just a free act to go do that. When we're talking in this area, the dune that has been here and the fact that a lot of these grasses that grow here tend to be deep rooted, that has definitely slowed down the erosion. There's some of the private properties that just have turf grass, and you can see that there's a big difference in terms of how deep the roots go down and how quickly some of those areas have been eroded. And then there is, as Margaret was mentioning, that there was the remains of an old revetment that was here that's been since covered over with sand. And so certainly something that could be a sort of temporary kind of measure would be looking at creating a kind of a buried structure or core or spine along this area to act as that last sort of line of defense, and then it could be planted and sand over there. There are also, sometimes you'll find that there are some grants available for habitat restoration around the Great Lakes. There was a program, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, that was funding a lot of those activities several years ago. Some of that funding has slowed down. It may come back, but that is another option that you have in this area.
Commissioner Abbott?
Yeah, I just want to, I'm on, yeah, I'm good. I just want to agree with, going back to the MWRD pier, not only do we want to know the condition of that pier, what will happen if we don't do anything, what should be done. We need to know that, but it might lead to a negotiation. So I just need your help with regard to that pier, because that's going to be complicated if we have to. If it needs to be fixed, we've got to start talking. So yes, very much, that's a priority.
Commissioner Wolf?
I had a question. So you mentioned that the dune grasses have helped to slow the erosion. Would it be beneficial then to kind of backfill that area with things that we know will slow the erosion, such as dune grasses? I'm not sure if there's other plantings or natural materials that could be put in there that would help control the erosion as well.
Yes, I think that the short answer is that there absolutely are, a variety of things that you could do in there that would, and it could range from more or less natural. But the grasses kind of work in two ways. The roots help to hold the sand, but during the erosive periods, but then the stems tend to kind of collect and help the sand aggregate during periods of the lower water and help to build up that dune, but then also will thrive in that environment and continue to grow up out of it. So they work to sort of build it up naturally without you doing anything, and then they work to sort of slow it down during the high water. So, but there are some areas in here that we are seeing when you first come into Gilson on the roadway and drive down, just before you make the turn into where the parking is, there's an area there where it's quite low. And I go down there pretty frequently, so it's always the first place that I see. There are some places where you see that the water has kind of gotten up, not quite to the road and the sidewalk, but it's getting there. So there definitely is a risk along this area as it currently stands.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. I am not seeing any more virtually raised hands. I'm scanning to see if there's any physically raised hands. Mark, at this point, is there any other specific questions or anything you want to ask to gain knowledge in areas you feel you're lacking?
No, this has been a wonderful discussion. I'll offer Bill and Margaret the chance to ask any questions they have, but I feel like I've taken a lot of your time, but it's been very, very useful for our work. And so on behalf of the team, very much appreciate your time this evening. But I'll let Margaret and Bill ask anything that they may have.
Bill, do you have anything?
Not any questions in particular. Just again, thank you. Echo Mark's comments. We appreciate the opportunity to meet with you. I think just to summarize, we've heard the the vision, so to speak, for Gilson and Langdon is really to maintain, to protect the land and the assets and the uses and maintain those uses and your current functions as best as possible. And we can get into some of the more details as we go in future meetings, but I think that's the objective that I heard. So thank you.
Thank you. Margaret, do you have anything to add?
Well, I guess just one residual question from the pictures that showed that there was flooding of the upland, most likely due to the run-up during storms with storm surge and everything else that's going on. Are there any feelings about doing raising the area in the back of the beach or putting in any type of flood defenses in terms of walls or small dikes or small dunes, anything like that? Because we want to stop that water from getting all the way over and into those areas.
Yeah, I'll speak first, and then if commissioners want to go on top, I think we want to look at those options. This is a low area. We get water in this area quite a bit. That's why our beach house has moved where it is, and the landscaping design is what it is. It was very thoughtful, but options that might make this less of a persistent issue for us during high water times would probably be something we want to understand what they are, what they look like, and what they cost.
Okay.
Commissioner Abbott?
Yeah, I would agree. Wasn't quite sure about the parking lot drainage. My feeling is we need to put pumps in, but that's just my feeling. I don't think we solved this flooding issue with the beach house. So if you've got some advice, I'd like to hear it.
Commissioner Wolf?
I would also concur with that. In addition, I'd like to see some sort of a possible solution for the flooding area that happens over on the Sailing Beach side. The water comes up fairly high there. I don't know if it's ever made it up to the shack or not, but I think that looking at, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I guess.
If we could look at some solutions for that area as well, I think that would be helpful.
Commissioner Clark?
Do we need to worry about the water treatment plant? I mean, is that something that should be taken into consideration, or can that be consideration in terms of, with that, like the Sailing Beach? Because I thought in November the water came very close to the water treatment plant. So I don't know if that's like bringing in another group or bringing in
For sure.
Agency
For sure. That I reached out and have reached out to the village in regards to this project, and in particular the water plant, invited them to join us for the beach walk, I'll call it, that Mark, Margaret, and Superintendent Solberg and I did. They were unable to make it that day, but they are interested. They are being kept involved behind the scenes.
Good. Okay. Good.
Do we know of any utilities that run along this beach, or any offshore utilities? Only that sometimes changes our approach if there's something buried out there.
The water plant has an intake pipe that runs under basically Sailing Beach and out into the water. So that's something that we'll always have to keep in consideration.
I think that's all my commissions. Thank you.
Great. Commissioner Murdoch, your hand is up. Mike, I'm sorry, could you, there you go.
I was muted, sorry about that. If we're looking at standing water, we should remember the south end of Overlook Drive as well.
Yeah.
In terms of any drainage there.
Yep. Down at the bend around by Dog Beach, correct?
Correct.
So I guess that does bring up, I know later in your meeting today, you have another discussion around master planning for the balance of the parkland. I will be happy to work with whomever you select, and there's obviously some places where there is like a little bit of interface, so I don't think we need to get into that now, but I just wanted to make that clear that would be obviously will help you where those two things come up against each other.
Thank you. All right. Anything else on this topic? All right, back to you, President Anderson. Smith Group, you don't have to stick for the rest of the meeting. Feel free to drop off. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a great exchange.
I need to stop sharing before here we go. There we go. Now I think I can leave. All right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Take care.
Okay, it's an hour and almost 50 minutes in. We are through the first 4 items on the agenda. I definitely would recommend that we push the item 6, which is the summer operations staff update, off until the board meeting. I would really recommend, I think, and we could all weigh in. I don't know that 40 minutes, we have a hard stop at 7, by the way. And in 40 minutes, I don't want to crunch the exchange personally on the Gilson plan and the 2 different proposals we got. And I don't know that 40 minutes is enough. So I don't know what everybody else thinks, and whether we try and squeeze it in. I just don't want to shortchange it.
Could we possibly have the discussion then at a later time, and then have as much of the staff update on the facilities, being that it's just informational and probably wouldn't be as much discussion?
Well, I think we could fit all this in the next board agenda, I'm going to guess.
Oh, that's fine too.
Commissioner Murdoch, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I agree. I think that I didn't expect the shoreline discussion to go as long as it did. I thought it was fascinating. I enjoyed it, and it was helpful. But given where we are, I think we're probably pushing it to try to get through the lakefront consultants. I think that would be ambitious. I'd prefer to see that at a later date.
And I agree with Commissioner Murdoch.
Commissioner Wolf, you had your hand up?
I was just going to say, what is the objective for the discussion regarding the lakefront consultants? Are we trying to make a decision on which one to hire? Are we just giving input on their proposals? What's the objective there?
Well, that would be for you guys to set. My hopes was that we were going to make a consensus sort of selection, giving us direction on who to work out a contract with to bring back for approval with the board. But if we don't want to try and do that now and don't want to start the discussion, stop it and come back, that's your choice as the board.
Is there a time frame that we have to let them know by, or it's just we're on our own timeline at this point?
I'm sure they would like to know sooner than later, but yes, we drive the timeline.
Okay, so it's not like there's a date to cut up for any kind of project. So
not that I'm aware of, no. Commissioner Abbott?
Yeah, I mean, the goal was to try to come to some agreement as to who we might hire and talk about next steps. Ultimately, we're trying to still, February of 2021 is the goal. And so, if we delayed this conversation another week or two, sure. I mean, we can still make that. So I think, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and if we should be talking about summer, we should be talking about important issues. And as much as I'd love to get to the planning, we can push this off to the board meeting or another cow. So I'm good.
Okay. Then we will move past 5, and then do people just want a kind of a lightning round update on the summer operations and get through that? Okay.
Yeah.
So
that'd be great.
I will do that, and Superintendent Gwynn will be there to answer any questions you have, because she's the real driving force and brains behind all of this. I will not do it any justice, but I will try. So the lakefront, as you all know, we opened this past weekend with very odd restrictions driven by the state guidelines and their restrictions. And so it was a brave new world for all of us. Currently, under the stay-at-home order, swimming in Lake Michigan is prohibited. We chose to still open the swimming beach still go with season pass only admission, more because we were trying to control the number of people in the physical space to try and keep as many people healthy as possible, not because we were trying to actually give access to the water and create a summer afternoon for people. And as we talked about earlier, we did experience some high numbers throughout the park in the swimming beach. We had brought back quickly some rehires of part-time staff. We supplemented them with full-time staff throughout the rest of the district, who took shifts and worked various positions to help provide additional support. Our past sales, quite honestly, have been very healthy since we announced we were going to be open. We already had been selling passes, so we had a nice increase if you're looking at it from that perspective. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is just provide some recreational opportunities for the community, try and make sure we're keeping people safe all at the same time. And so far, while it was an interesting first weekend, we're off to an okay start, and we're looking to continue to improve and continue to do all that moving forward. We do expect that when we move into phase 3, there will not be new additional restrictions that would prevent the water, so that at that point we would open up the water. I know at one point when I talked to all of you individually that once the water was open, other communities had been considering swim at your own risk for the duration of the summer and not putting lifeguards on staff because of concerns over health exposures in the event that a lifeguard had to perform a rescue of someone at the beach. The more we are watching our own operations over the weekend, the more we're talking with the fire department and other places. We're likely to institute lifeguards once we can get them trained, once we can work through the Red Cross certification process that we must adhere to. So likely we will be swim at your own risk for a period of time until we have all of those regulations worked out and have everybody trained and certified and allowed to do the job.
Okay.
Any questions on the lakefront?
It's not swimming, but with the boats, it was pointed out to me that we're not renting boats or stand-up paddle boards or this type of thing, and just wanted to understand why that is and if that will change.
Correct. At this time, we've decided not to rent the different vessels that we have at the sailing beach, and the whole thought process behind that is just the communal sharing of the vessels versus a family who has a spot on the beach. It's them coming to use their own equipment, and that's it. And versus out for an hour, back for an hour, out for an hour sort of circumstance. We don't know if that's going to change throughout the summer. As we all know, the guidelines and restrictions and public sentiment around this whole thing is evolving very quickly, but that's where we stand today. Another restriction that we put in place on the sailing beach that I failed to mention is that we are not doing guest pass booklets this year. Again, that's not to necessarily have any other impact other than to reduce the number of people so we have a better chance of keeping people healthier, but still allow access to the recreational amenity that is the sailing beach. So that is the motivation behind that. That's another thing that is new and different this year because of the global pandemic. Commissioner Wolf?
Question about social distancing. I know that's hard to manage at the beach. Is there a way that we have a plan of enforcing it? Do we call the police if a guard goes up and says to people, look, you're too close? Or how are we managing the social distancing piece?
Yes, that it's like how we manage people swimming in South Beach where there's no swimming. Our staff is trying to politely engage initially, get people to comply and adhere with guidelines. And if people are resistant and aren't willing to comply, then ultimately our only recourse is to get the police involved. And, we kept an officer very busy this weekend between the South Beach area and also helping the village administer the ordinances that are applicable to Elmwood Dunes. So he was quite busy running back and forth between the two locations. And that's how we operate. They are our enforcement of our ordinances and our rules. We don't have our own police force, and we're not going to ask any of our staff to engage any more than informing, asking, and then calling.
So can the police ticket if people won't, like, if they thumb their nose and are like, whatever, like, are there really...
I don't believe they can on social distancing. I don't think that the state of Illinois or the village of Wilmette have included that in any of their stay-at-home measures or their emergency ordinances. But I guess it's not beyond the realm of possibility, because I do believe other states are doing that in certain ways, but I don't believe that's been started in Illinois, but I could be wrong. I'm not law enforcement, and nor am I a lawyer.
One last question. On the sailing beach, since we're not renting anything and, kids are looking for activities, is there a minimum age requirement that children can go out on a kayak, a paddleboard, a boat, without parental supervision?
I don't believe there is for a paddleboard, because that was a question when we first started the SUP racks on the sailing beach. People were concerned at how young some of the children were using them, and that they weren't really using them as SUPs. They were using them as flotation devices to pretty much swim. I would have to look into it, and I don't know if Superintendent Gwynn would know the answer to that either. She's shaking her head no.
I'm just curious, because if it's going to be swim at your own risk for the next few weeks or whatnot, the kids are going to be down there, school's going to be letting out, and would love to have some information to give people to say, look, your 12-year-old can't, I'll take out your whatever and just go, because there's no lifeguard.
And keep in mind that someone who's taking out a kayak or an SUP aren't going to be at the swimming beach anyway, so there aren't lifeguards in the first place. And also, I want to, maybe something I should have said initially, swimming your own risk doesn't mean you're out there by yourself. We have staff walking the beach. Those staff members have the ability to alert first responders, and those first responders get to us within minutes. And so it's not that people are going to be out there alone. It's just that we aren't going to have certified lifeguards that are going to be trained and able to do all the first aid and all the rescue techniques, but we're not going to let someone just sit there. But we're going to do just like anyone else on the beach would. They're going to call, they're going to try and assist, but they're just not going to be.
Thank you.
Commissioner Abbott? Brian, can you unmute yourself?
Unmute. Sorry. Oh, here we are. Yeah, sorry. You guys are doing a fantastic job. Absolutely fantastic. I want to support what you guys are doing completely. I don't know that anybody would disagree with this, but I want to make sure that we're following state regs. I think the state, has tried to work their way through this in a way that's scientific and based on the facts that they have. So, following the state regs, you guys have been doing that and working with them as well. Whether or not, they're going fast enough, too fast, I don't want to get into that. I'm glad we're following the state. I think having the parks been open has been very, very important to people. I'm really glad that we kept our parks open, and to the extent possible that we've kept open spaces. That's a priority of mine. Obviously, we want to do it safely. There does seem to be, this is going to be my question, there might seem to be some science that's indicating that airborne contamination from COVID is the bigger culprit than it being infected by surface viruses. That, I don't know if you and your staff is there growing science behind that? Because summer does represent sort of an opportunity in that getting outdoors. We've been trying to keep outdoors open. It does kind of, I don't know what's going to happen in the fall because we're all going to go back indoors. But so summer kind of represents this opportunity, and perhaps airborne is the culprit and being outside is the good thing. And I don't know, it's sort of a question. Is there science behind that, and how does that affect where we're going?
So I guess the way I would answer that is everything that you're reading are things that we're reading, people at the state are reading, and I think we have, at least myself, and I believe most of the staff look at it as, the risk of infection is lower outdoors versus indoors, and so that's why things like a beach are easier to contemplate opening versus, say, a fitness center.
Right.
And so, but we are not going to try and pretend we're scientists. We're going to still rely on the expertise of those at the state level to set that guidance. Commissioner Schisler?
It kind of piggybacks on what Commissioner Abbott was saying. I too have been reading that even surface contact is not as likely for the transmission. And with that, I might want to just relook at the rental of boats and watercraft, just because it is something that someone could do alone or with their family, or still have a recreational activity. And so that's the only thing on that, is just to see if there's a way to make that safe.
Great. Thank you. Anything else on lakefront that anyone has questions on, or anything that staff wants to add? All right, then I'm going to move on to item 6B, which is summer programs, and including camp. So it was amazing timing when it was mentioned that we're not going to criticize how quickly or when the guidance of the state comes out. We're just going to react to it when we can. Amazingly so, the most recent guidance came out on Monday on the holiday, and we sit here Wednesday, and I can tell you that much of the recreation staff time today was spent rethinking a little bit what we're going to be able to do this summer, and things that we might be able to add to our summer offerings versus what we were thinking about, just 4 days ago. And so Superintendent Gwynn is very much getting information probably right now in her email, because she set a deadline of this evening to get all the information from her staff. We're going to then turn that around and send out information. She's been compiling a letter and an email to the public, and we're looking to send that out tomorrow or Friday at the latest, letting people know more specifics about things like summer camp and other summer programs. Any questions on that? Great. Lastly, pool operations. At the current time, there's absolutely zero guidance that says this is how to operate a pool from the state. But absent that guidance, we're using all the other collective guidance about how to operate anything else that we're doing and applying that to the pool. And we are getting ready again to put the finishing touches on that plan. We don't believe we're going to have a typical pool summer, but we're going to try and make the pool as available as we possibly can, and still stay within the guidelines and still stay within an operational model that works and makes sense for all involved. So again, further information on that we're hoping to make public very, very soon. Any questions on that? And then lastly, my miscellaneous bullet point there, I'm just going to throw in things like skate park, things like batting cages, things like uses of the fields by organizations that are outside of us, such as Wings Soccer and Wilmette Baseball and things like that, are all things that we're looking to, again, come next week, have a lot more information available, have communications to the community and to those organizations, and get kind of more things up and operational as the summer gets going here.
And Steve, what about kind of the typical indoor stuff like fitness and anything else that might be in a building?
We've had some level of conversation about ways to maybe specific to the fitness center, using it for one-on-one trainings and then moving group classes to outdoor spaces that we might kind of carve out with maybe a pop-up tent of some sort to give people a little bit of out of the sun area to do their classes. All that stuff's in development. It's all been things we've thought about how we're going to do, but now that we have tangible guidelines to reflect on, we can put the nuts and bolts on that and get that out as well. As far as other indoor spaces are concerned, I forgot to mention, we're looking to put the ice rink back in service here in June as well, in advance of some other entities' usual seasons, things like that. So we're putting all those restrictions together, communicating them out to Wilmette Hockey and to our figure skaters and our freestyle skaters and all of that. So we're hoping to get that open here in the next week as well.
Right. And I'll just keep reminding everybody, I see Sheila on there, the need to know the finances of the park district today and what we're looking at over the next few months really has to be known before we can make a bunch of decisions. For example, you know, we may have spent some time tonight on item 5, which was the Gilson plan, but would we have, you know, we can't make decisions tonight, but if we got to the board meeting and had made a decision at the board meeting next time, would we actually go and spend the money yet or not? And that's a decision that I find really hard to make right now, given we have no projections. So I'm just, right now, to me, it's until we have some numbers to start working with, it's really, really tough to spend any money. And, you know, we've got to look at, do we need to make further cost cuts? And the longer we wait to see projections, the, you know, more money that, you know, is going out the door.
Yep.
So,
Yep. And I can guarantee you that by the next time this group gets together, we will have where we are today and projections.
Okay, great. And then assumptions as to what are built into the projection in terms of season, you know, what do we have assumed for the fall?
Yep.
You know, that's because each month that we go by, things are not improving as quickly as we had hoped a month before, I guess.
Fair enough. Any other discussion? Brian? Unmute yourself, Brian. For some reason, I'm not allowed to unmute you.
I know, and I don't get along with computers. So the question is really more for the board. Staff has been doing a fantastic job, and ultimately, it is the board who's accountable to the residents. You know, does the board wish to make any sort of statements in terms of, you know, our priorities, which obviously is caution? You know, we get a lot of emails. I'm not answering them because I don't want to go off, you know, well, I'm not going to go off on somebody, but I don't, you know, it's sort of like, should the board make a coordinated response to how the park district is addressing this crisis? Talk about it.
Well, I think in Steve's public announcements, it's been, I think, relatively consistent and clear, don't you think?
Yeah, but I do kind of like the idea of having the commissioners, the board, actually make a statement, even if it's only that we support the decisions that are being made by Steve and the other, director and the superintendents. Just that, you know, they've made good decisions so far, and we trust in their judgment. They have the community at heart, and so I mean I would not be against a board statement that long either. I don't know if someone wants to put together.
I think that any statement obviously would come from Gordon being the president, and then obviously, you know, signed by all of us or whatever everybody's comfortable with. But I think that obviously all the communications, we need a clear message so we're not contradicting anything Steve says and his messaging. So I think it would, if we did put something out, would be super simple that we support everything the staff is doing at this time. Yep. We thank you for all your communications. Please feel free to continue to reach out to us and contact Steve Wilson if you have questions.
Right, and I'll jump in real quick. I appreciate the sentiment, and I appreciate more than anything, the support that is being voiced here by the commissioners. But I do want to make it clear that most of the correspondence I'm receiving from the public are more positive, more thankful, more understanding. There is not a ton of, angry sort of sentiment, but we do have an opportunity to make that statement either at a board meeting, but we are also putting together a virtual fall brochure, and in our brochures, we do put in a president's message. So that's another platform in which a statement could be made. So I'm happy to work with the board or work with Gordon or stay on it if you want me to, because it's the board statement, and make it happen. But I also want to make it clear that really the community has been extremely understanding and extremely patient, and it's really made our jobs a lot easier.
Yeah, I think anytime we want to share a message, I go to what are our existing channels, and we have, for example, the board meeting. So if you're making a comment or a statement at the beginning of the board meeting would seem like an appropriate opportunity. We have a meeting coming up in just a short while. Another would be the board brief, which I know is traditionally written by staff, but certainly we could add to that or support that. And then, of course, the fall brochure makes a lot of sense as well. So there may be some existing channels we can use to help amplify the message that I think we're all pretty universally aligned on. That I'm pleased with how things are going, considering the challenges and the information.
Yep.
Anybody else?
Yeah, just one last question on a different subject. Are we going to meet in person in June?
Oh my! I hadn't even started wrapping my head around that. I guess it's quite a possibility. We could figure it out. We can't just have open doors and 50 people attend the meeting. So we would definitely have to have a virtual component. But maybe this group can get together. I'm counting too many boxes on the screen, but one of them's a computer somewhere. So maybe no staff and just board. But we'll think about it. I hadn't thought about that yet. Thank you.
I'll be honest with you. I don't know how we'd social distance. Well, we'd have to social distance for me to be involved.
Fair enough. I think we can do a combo if people would rather be in person. All right.
Just back to the original, what we were just talking about. I was a little reticent about sort of creating a new communication in support of staff when we're clearly all in support of staff, especially on this issue. And I'm worried that it makes us look like we're being defensive. And I don't want to give that impression at all. Creating something new, this one would be an easy one because all 7 of us are completely in alignment on this, I believe. But there will be other issues in the future where we may want to have maybe as total alignment, and then they'll be looking, people may be looking for something and we're not really willing to give it. So, if we do it, all 7 of us will review it and approve it. I'm just not a hill I'm going to die on one way or the other. But if we do it, we're going to do it. All 7 of us are going to say, I like it. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Oh, can I make one request, Steve? I know that you guys are super busy with everything, but just trying to keep our website up to date as possible on any changes, and links for here's the latest on camps or here, just because I feel like people nowadays, they're not walking into our buildings asking questions, and that's their first line of area where they're getting their information. So I know that's a bigger undertaking to change that daily, or
it's not a daily process. We haven't really made a significant change since we opened the beach last week, and we're getting ready to make new announcements on other things later this week. So when we make those public announcements, we do update our page. So you'll see at the top of our website now on the homepage, we have that red emergency banner, and within that there's a yellow button. If people click that yellow button, it takes them to all of our updates, everything. They can see all of them historically. But we also email them out to everybody. We post them on social media, trying to get it out there. But yes, all the actual official final decision email items on our website. It might feel a little different to me or to Superintendent Gwynn or any of you, because we're talking about options and thoughts and things like that. But when it becomes finalized, we do put it on the website.
Awesome. And just, yeah, so like if they click on Lakefront, if it takes them back to that page where it shows what's going on, or somehow to like direct people there if they don't initially go to that emergency banner, if they, you know, go to another area and are navigating.
Good idea. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
so, thanks.
Thank you.
Anything else? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.